Good day. My name is Dove Wilker, and I am the National Director for Black-Jewish Relations of American Jewish Committee. Today's program is brought to you by the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance, which was established to forge unity between the two communities. Today, we are going to hear from two experts in the world of racism and anti-Semitism. First, we will hear from Michael Lawson, CEO of the Urban League of Los Angeles, and then we will hear from Dr. Saba Soomekh, Associate Director for American Jewish Committee's Los Angeles office. Michael Lawson is retired as a partner after 31 years with Skadden, Arps, Slate, Megan, and Flom. During his tenure with the firm, he was appointed to the Los Angeles Airport Commission and served as its president. In addition, Mr. Lawson has been a board member of several charitable organizations, Loyola Marymount University and Morehouse College. He served as a U.S. ambassador in the Obama administration prior to joining the Los Angeles Urban League as its president and CEO in February of 2018. He is a graduate of Loyola Marymount University and Harvard Law School. Michael, welcome to today's program, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation, and I am always happy to work with our Jewish men and women and brothers and sisters in this battle. This alliance has been going on for a long time, and it will continue for a long time. The Los Angeles Urban League, which I am proud to be the president and CEO since late 2017, has been in Los Angeles for 100 years, starting in 1921. So this is our centennial year, and we're celebrating in a sense, but not celebrating in a great sense. When you look at the events that have taken place just over the last few weeks, and as late as yesterday, which the incident in Colorado is not necessarily a race-based incident, but the violence that is a part of this country's history is something that we all must look at and fight, quite frankly. And the Black and Jewish communities have been a part of that for more than decades. Going back to the race war, I mentioned 1921 because that was the year in which Greenwood, Oklahoma, was destroyed in a race catastrophe. This was a district of Tulsa that we called the Black Wall Street. It was a jewel of economic empowerment for the Black community, for African Americans across the nation. And it was destroyed in a 3-day riot that included bombs being dropped from planes. Over 300 people were buried in unmarked graves. And there was very little talk of it afterwards. And that wasn't the only catastrophe, the only event of its kind. There's a period that we called the Red Summer, where Black townships across the country were devastated by white mobs. And to the point where it's hard to even talk about it. The devastation that caused. And the fact of the matter is our communities share some of these same histories. And for that reason, we have been arm in arm for decades in this battle against racism. And we need to, not we need to, but we are re-engaging once again in this time when racism has raised its ugly head once more. I will talk more about this, but I don't want to overstate my welcome in terms of this introduction. But I am anxious to have this dialogue about what is happening, why it is happening, and the collaboration between our peoples and others in the fight against it. Thank you for having me. I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Michael. It is now my honor to introduce my colleague, Dr. Saba Soomekh, who is the Associate Director at American Jewish Committee's Los Angeles office and a lecturer at the Academy of Jewish Religion, where she teaches religious studies and Middle Eastern history courses. Saba received her BA in Religious Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, her master's in Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, and her PhD in Religious Studies from the University of California at Santa Barbara. Saba, I hope you'll share a little bit about, similar to Michael, about the importance of the relationship, a little bit about anti-Semitism, and then we'll continue the conversation with Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance. This is so important. I want to thank Michael. I respect you so much. I love the Urban League. I love our partnership. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, has been around for 2,000 years. They call it the oldest hatred in the world. And what we're seeing today is that you're finding it both on the political left and the political right. And Jews can't fight this alone. We need our allies. We need our communities to really come together and fight all of these hatreds, because we're all really basically canaries in each other's coal mine. If they're going to come and gun down Jews in their synagogues, in their kosher markets, they will go to a Black church, which they have done. They will go to the Gurdwaras. They will go to the Buddhist temples and Hindu temples, etc. So we all need to sit here and work together and build allyship. I have a whole talk on anti-Semitism that I could wait until we're ready to give that. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance, Michael, for having me and for really starting this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Saba. So I wonder, perhaps I'll ask a few questions and then you can share your screen. I know that you have a presentation to share, so maybe you'll jump back and forth between our conversation and some of the information that you have to share on the screen, so that way the three of us can engage in a constructive conversation here. So Michael, let's start with you. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more. You opened by talking about the massacre at the Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, but I'm wondering, how have you seen racism evolve over the past 100 years? Saba mentioned the three forms of types of anti-Semitism. I'm wondering, are there types of racism that we see?
I don't know that there are types. Racism is all of the types that you might want to describe are embedded in the name, embedded in the term. It is a tool that is used by politicians for their own benefit, even if they don't actually believe it. But actually, it is a form of, I'm not even sure I know the words for it, but it is based in fear. It is based in a belief that that one group actually cannot thrive without stepping on the neck of another group. That the words that you see in our Constitution don't really apply, because if this is truly a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, you would not set up institutions that prohibit liberty and justice for all. It is a tacit recognition that a level playing field does not work for one particular group. If you believed in a level playing field, then you would not have limitations on the education of one group. You would not have limitations on the hiring of one group. You would not limit the ability of one or another group to thrive in this environment in a manner consistent with the language that we have in our Constitution. It is, in my words, a tacit belief that that in a fair and competitive world, you believe that you would not be able to succeed. I'm not suggesting that that is true. I'm suggesting that that is the basis of one of the bases on which racism stands.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Well, so I think, Michael, I so appreciate that. I was wondering, perhaps you could share one way in which the work of the Urban League helps to counter racism in society today.
The Urban League started in 1910, National Urban League. As I mentioned earlier, the Los Angeles Urban League was in 1921. The focus has always been on economic empowerment because we believe that one of the offshoots of racism, or actually one of the primary principles of racism in this country, is prohibiting Black and brown and other minorities, including the Jewish community, from accessing credit and capital, being able to buy property, and so on and so forth. And that has been the case since 1619, when the first slaves were brought into the United States. So we have always been about making sure that these opportunities are available to us and other peoples who are the targets of these laws. And in addition to that, one of the things that is a part of the Urban League's our planks is our foundation was brought forth under Vernon Jordan, who we recently lost. And that was the understanding that is more than just protesting, that we need to be able to sit down and do the hard negotiation that changes things. And on that pillar, that is one of the pillars where the Jewish and African American communities have stood together. And when you look at the civil rights laws that were drafted and passed, when you look at the voting laws that were drafted and passed, when you look at a lot of the work that has been done because a lot of discussion behind the scenes took place in White House, in state houses, and not just in churches, so in synagogues, but there as well. And so that is, you have to build the legal infrastructure in order to support the work that our organizations have done over the years. But this is, we have made a lot of success over the years. There's no question. I hear young people say all the time, oh, it's never been as bad as this. And I say, then you haven't read your history, because it has been. We have made great progress, but there's still much to be done, as evidenced by the senseless murders that happened last week, and the senseless murders that happened just yesterday.
Thank you, Michael. So I think that's a good segue for Saba. Let's talk about history for a second. right? What is the history of anti-Semitism, and sort of how is it manifesting itself today? That very simple question in I'm sure a short answer that you have.
Dev knows me well. My background is a professor, so of course I have a PowerPoint, but I promise you it won't be boring. It's lots of pictures just to be able to really talk about this. What you see here is just this context of anti-Semitism, and what we have on top are the Rothschilds. And people hear about the Rothschilds. Who are they? Why do the Rothschilds get blamed for everything? This Jewish family that supposedly controls the world, that QAnon, the Proud Boys, etc., talk about. We also see them discussed on the far left. We also see here Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, that famous chant. Down here, we have what happened in Pittsburgh when you have 11 Jews who were gunned down in their synagogues. And then, of course, the Jewish kosher market in New Jersey that Jews were gunned down. And then we're also going to talk about something that a lot of people don't recognize as anti-Semitism, but when anti-Semitism is masked as anti-Zionism or as hatred towards Israel. And it's going to be very important for me to make that distinction between criticism of Israel, which is absolutely okay and makes for a healthy democracy. Jews do it all the time. Israelis do it all the time. And then, of course, when you're demonizing, delegitimizing, etc. So anti-Semitism, a lot of people don't know what this word means. It's literally the hatred towards Jews and violence towards Jews. Why has it been on the rise? Of course, we always see it, and I think all terms of racism with economic uncertainty, when certain people in power are stoking that hatred, the lack of confidence in democracy, when people are putting emphasis on their racial and national identity. We're seeing all these Holocaust survivors who have passed away, so the fading legacy of the Holocaust, this polarization between the left and the right over Israel-Palestine, not having an idea of what anti-Semitism is, which is why it's important to have this conversation. And then, of course, a whole other conversation that should be had over the rise of racism and anti-Semitism on the internet and social media. AJC did a survey in 2020, and only 9 out of 10 people 9 out of 10 Jews believe anti-Semitism was the problem, and 21% believe they've never heard of it. What are some of the sources of anti-Semitism? The history of it.
Saba, do me a favor. Hold off 1 second. Go back to the 3 slides ago that listed the rise of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, Michael, I don't want to create a false equivalency here, right? Racism and anti-Semitism are both bad, and they are different in some ways. But I'm wondering, on this slide, which of these items would you say, I'm not sure I'd call it a rise of racism, but sort of the continuing state of racism? Are there any of these that you would say sort of check off that mark too?
The internet and social media is huge right now. And the internet and social media fuel what the others, these other statements. There's no question about it. Without the internet and social media, these other causes would still be there, but they wouldn't have the breadth and depth of outreach that they have today. You have people talking in an echo chamber, listening to this and not hearing anything more. I would say that is the most impactful element in this list.
Excellent, thank you. One, and I want to sort of add on to that. The 4th one down there says the fading legacy of the Holocaust. Michael, you started off by speaking about the creation of the Urban League of Los Angeles was in part response to what had happened in Oklahoma, the massacre. And I know that for myself, I had heard about I think they called them riots originally. The language has changed, especially over the past. I feel the United States at large is sort of entertaining a different type of conversation around the terminology of what happened in Oklahoma. And I'm wondering, is the fading legacy of events like the massacre in Oklahoma or similar incidents across the country, throughout history, do you think that is an issue as well?
Oh, there's no question about it. And the fading history of the Holocaust is an essential step in increasing anti-Semitism. There are people who were born in Tulsa. Greenwood was a district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. There were people who were born in Tulsa who never heard of Greenwood, did not know that this district was destroyed in a 3-day riot. The importance of remembering the Holocaust is, you cannot downplay it, because we can see in real time the impact of not remembering. So, and we can talk about it, and I applaud the Jewish community for the emphasis on remembering. And we are trying to do that same thing. The New York Times did a series called the 1619 Project that chronicled the history of America beginning in 1619, when the first enslaved people were brought to the United States. I learned so much from that series that I didn't know. And I pride myself on being a student of Black history. There is, and understand that was a deliberate act of keeping information out, keeping information away. I will tell you one little anecdote. I speak a lot of times in front of students in middle school and high school. And one of the things that I ask them to do, I tell them that I'm going to teach you how to write in Arabic. And they say, oh, you can't make me do that. And I say, take out your pens, write down your phone number. And I said, you just wrote in Arabic. Because when I was in first grade, they taught us two types of numerals, Roman numerals and Arabic numerals. And this country stopped calling them Arabic numerals. That was deliberate. These kids they said they did not hear, they never heard the term Arabic numerals. Understand, if you were taught geometry, you can't learn geometry without hearing about the Greek culture. But you have to learn Arabic. You have to learn algebra, but they don't tell you where it came from. That it came from North Africa. That it came from the area where your ancestors and our ancestors were. And this is a deliberate act, a deliberate ploy to keep us from understanding our history. And again, I applaud what the Jewish community has done in making sure that this is not lost, and we have to follow suit.
Thank you. All right, Saba, I cut you off in the middle of your presentation, so let's continue on.
No, first of all, Michael and Dove, throughout this presentation, please continue to do this. Let's have this lively conversation. You don't need to wait for me to finish anything. What I want to just quickly do, just because you did ask for, where did anti-Semitism come from? Because I think it's really important to understand what is anti-Semitic so people understand how not to do it and not to gaslight Jews. So just really quickly, I'll go through this. Sources of anti-Semitism. Number one thing is the killing of God. You're sitting here being like, what are people talking about? For 2,000 years, unfortunately, we cannot talk about anti-Semitism without really looking at the Synoptic Gospels and Christianity, where Jews were accused of deicide, killing God. And thus the whole idea was that all Jews are responsible for this. Now, how does this get played out today? We're seeing this concept being played out in the Middle East with Jews or Israelis, quote unquote, as Christ killers. And what we're seeing is that anti-Semitism, while it started off as a Christian concept and Jews were not seen as Christ killers or the killing of God in Islam, it has permeated to the Middle East with the creation of the State of Israel, with the protocols of Elders of Zion that we'll talk about, with Mein Kampf being translated into Arabic. So we're seeing this anti-Semitic canard all the time in newspapers in the Middle East. Also, unfortunately, in Christianity, Jews have been considered and were referred to as being satanic. That language has been picked up a lot. And unfortunately, you have someone like Farrakhan, and I bring up Farrakhan because some people will say, well, he's not that big of a deal. He's a big deal. And when the left appropriates Farrakhan's language, that becomes a huge issue for the Jews. So Farrakhan talked about Jews as being satanic. We're from the synagogue of Satan. He also called Hitler a great man. We're also seeing this concept of Jews being satanic again, being in the Middle East. And this is a newspaper from Qatar where Jews and Israelis are referred to in that way. And then the blood libel, the most ridiculous thing that you could think of, but yes, it's legit. In the Middle Ages, Christian Europe told the world, the Europeans, that Jews would steal Christian babies, use their blood for the Passover matzah. And so tens of thousands of Jews were killed because of this. And then the blood libel has also continued on in the Middle East. And over here, this is a picture that a Jordanian teacher from the United Nations Relief Work Agency posted on her Facebook that permeated all over the Middle East of Israelis killing Palestinian children and drinking their blood. We see this in newspapers all the time. Jews were accused of poisoning the wells and in Christian Europe. So you want to?
I just want to say there's an example from earlier today where a Brazilian, the head of the Brazilian Labor Party accused Jews of sacrificing children. I mean, so blood libels aren't just limited to a geographic area. It's sadly a global, literally just I got a tweet about it 5 hours ago.
Literally. And then Ethiopian Jews were considered quote unquote hyena people in Ethiopia because the belief was that they would go out in the middle of the night and steal children and drink their blood, etc. So this is something that we still see, poisoning the wells. Jews were accused of the bubonic plague, of spreading it. Jews were accused in Christian Europe of poisoning wells. And now again, what we see is Jews have been accused, as this political cartoon shows, and Israelis, of poisoning the well trope regarding COVID-19, of either starting it, creating it, spreading it, or creating a vaccine or helping to find a vaccine, but not giving it to Palestinians as a way of poisoning the well, etc. And then I have to bring up the most notorious book that basically permeated all over the world, which spread all these anti-Semitic tropes. This book is called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It started in 1903, where it was written by Russians, but it was written as if Jews wrote this book. And it talks about how Jews got together and they're writing minutes from their meetings talking about how they want to control the world. And what the ideas you're getting from this book is that Jews have dual loyalty, that Jews are, again, responsible for blood libel, for clannishness charge, that there's a global conspiracy theory of Jews trying to take over the world through banking, through the media. Jews are obsessed with money. Jews are shrewd and unfair. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion has been proven to be a false document. At this point, by 1910, Henry Ford brought the protocols out to America. By 1921, the Times of London said, this is a false document. Nevertheless, Hitler appropriated it for his book, Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf gets translated into numerous languages. Until this day, Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a famous book that is sold on Amazon.
Wait, but I want to go back and Michael, because I'm just curious. If you go back one slide, Michael, is there one publication that you would point to that sort of defines race, that has sort of corrupted the minds of people as it relates to the Black community, so is there a similar example that you find, or is it sort of there's lots of examples and so there's not just one? I'm curious about that.
I can't pinpoint any one particular document or book, but understand that Christianity is a big part of the Black community, and all of the statements that Saba mentioned were spewed in Black churches as well as white churches. But notwithstanding that, there was this coalition between the Black community and the Jewish community thrived because of the shared abuse that that each of our communities were experiencing. And let me be very clear, because the Jewish community reached out. There's no question. So, you know, both of our communities extended their hands to one another. The clergy in both communities reached out and looked beyond the rhetoric. But yes, that was there. But in terms of the larger bibliography that the good doctor has put out there, I can't say that that was a part of it. But in the Black community, the church meant so much more than just church. It was the place where the decisions were made, where the focus on economic justice. All of these issues were formed in the church because our most powerful leaders were from the church. And so that was the foundation of a lot of the work that was done even outside of religious work. So yes, I would say that that's, the church was a good thing and a bad thing in this context, because it was through the ministers that we formed this coalition. But at the same time, what has been described as part of the Christian, I don't know what you would call it, Saba.
Canon, the Christian
narrative.
Yeah.
It was there as well. It was there as well.
Stop.
Oh, sorry, Jeff. I do want to say that in 1965, the Catholic Church came out with a very important document called Sources of Anti-Semitism, which basically said Jews are not responsible for the killing of Jesus. They apologized for basically 2,000 years of anti-Semitism that led to something like the Holocaust being able to happen, and looked at Jews as their brothers, etc. And the Protestant churches quickly thereafter also appropriated that language. So the church has done a lot in order to really reach out and do a lot of that. And Michael, whenever you get a chance, I would love to, if you get a chance to talk about, are the churches as important today as they are in the past? Because I think in terms of allyship, it's important to know where we could find those groups and communities.
My answer to that question is yes, they are as important as they were before. The difference is the emphasis that you would see in terms of the leadership in the clergy. The clergy is not necessarily in the forefront of a lot of the movements that you see, but they are still there. Make no mistake, they haven't retreated, but there's a broader base of organizers out there who are doing good work, who do not come from the clergy, but the church is still there. Make no mistake. Some of the most powerful people who fostered and nurtured the nonviolent movement are still around. One of my heroes is Reverend James Lawson, who is still teaching and is in Los Angeles. And we, once a month, we sit at his knee and get more and more wisdom. So yes, the fight continues. And that aspect, that part of the fight is still strong and still teaching all the time. By the way, I'm not related to him. I wish I were.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Saba, why don't we have you continue a little bit as I interrupted you again.
Okay. So what I wanted to just do is make people aware of things that you think might not be anti-Semitic, but how they are seen by the Jewish community as being anti-Semitic. This is a really famous mural in London from 2012. This is a mural that got Jeremy Corbyn in trouble because what you see here again is that global conspiracy motive. Here are a group of Jews. People don't recognize them as Jews, but this mural was intended as Jews playing Monopoly on the backs of indigenous populations. Jeremy Corbyn loves this mural, and when people pointed out how anti-Semitic this is, he said, no, it's not true. And the question is, well, when Jews are telling you something's anti-Semitic, you as a non-Jew, don't gaslight them, listen to them. But people don't recognize this. I know Snoop Dogg recently put this up on his stories, and then my girlfriend, who is a huge social activist, very thoughtful, also then put it up. And then I turned to her, and it wasn't canceling, it's counseling, and said, I know you don't recognize this. I know you don't realize what this is, but this is where this comes from. And she was so apologetic, immediately took it down. And she said, thank you for making me aware of it. So that's what I think is just so important, is making people aware of this stuff. Dov, I could start with anti-Semitism on the right. Do you want me to get to that, or? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
and we could expound on it. Okay. So anti-Semitism on the right, yes, we know about the KKK, we know about white supremacist groups, but let's really look at the freaky groups that have really popped up in the past 4 years that we are seeing show up at, you know, all of these insurrections in Charlottesville, et cetera. Number one I want to talk about is Proud Boys. And this is why allyship, again, I know I sound like a broken record, is so important. All of these groups are against the same people: Jews, Blacks, Browns, LGBTQ, women, Asian AAPI communities. So the Proud Boys, established in 2016, see themselves as Western chauvinists. They don't say they're the alt-right, they don't say they're racist, but they absolutely are. Again, they're homophobic, misogynistic, Islamophobic, racist, etc. They have been present at Charlottesville at the Capitol insurrection. Again, here we see the 6 million was not enough t-shirts that became so popular. And then, of course, we have someone like Enrico Torrio, who is an Afro-Cuban guy from Miami, who is the leader of the Proud Boys. And so this is where it almost becomes so weird that you're having a man who identifies as being Black, who identifies as being brown, but yet who is still permeating all this racism, etc. If we have time, we could get into that. Another one that is.
I want to stop on that one for a second.
Yes.
Michael, I was wondering if you could comment on that. I mean, what type of challenge does that pose for your work in sort of trying to raise awareness further about racism when you have somebody like I'm not sure of his name exactly, Saba, but
Enrico Torrio.
Yeah, Michael, how does that affect you and the work that you're trying to do?
One of the first pillars of when you look at a list of rules in terms of how to defeat an enemy, divide and conquer. That is the first rule of trying to defeat an enemy that is stronger than you. And I see that this is what's happening. Black people around the world we're not a monolithic group. And the fact is that there are people who believe differently. I mean, you listed Farrakhan earlier, whose voice had, quite frankly, too much resonance among African Americans in the United States on this issue, and has to be refuted. The fact is that as much as people want to see us as one unified group, we're not necessarily that way. But the fact is that, as I mentioned earlier, the problem with social media is that you can get into this echo chamber and not hear anything more than that. I have had more than one conversation about our relationship with other ethnic groups within the United States. And you look at the relationship between the African American community and the Korean community. There were riots after Rodney King was brutalized that focused on the Korean American community in Los Angeles. That was wrong. That was something that should not have happened. And we are working together with the AAPI community. Just last Wednesday, as you know, we had a press conference to focus on the anti-Asian hate that is going on through and increasing through the United States. And we scheduled that press conference we scheduled the press conference before the massacre that happened in Atlanta. But quite frankly, we could have scheduled it on any date and it would have been right after some other horrific crime had been committed against either an Asian group or a Jewish synagogue or something else, because that is a part of what this country has been about. And in my conversations with people within my own community is similar to and almost verbatim of what we're talking about here, that we have to work together because we are all fighting for the same thing. And it is when our communities are not together that the white supremacists have an advantage. And we must fight against that.
And Michael, I just want to commend you for the reflection within your own community, because the Jewish community is doing a lot of that. There is no doubt that we need to reflect, and we are reflecting on the racism within the Jewish community, the racism that Black Jews deal with within the Jewish community, outside of the Jewish community. They're getting it from being Black, they're getting it from being Jewish. So it's an internal dialogue that our communities need to have within ourselves. And have that reckoning moment of recognizing it. And then it's also that allyship. And unless we do the work within ourselves, then we can't even be good allies to each other. And I think that's really important too. And I could tell you, just as the African American community is really dealing with this with the churches, our synagogues, at least in LA, every single one of them are the BJEA training, the Black Jewish narrative, all of this stuff is really becoming really important. I'm a Middle Eastern Jew, I'm a brown Jew. So this is also really important for me because a lot of my history has been, relegated to the past or not really discussed within the Jewish community or the Middle Eastern community.
And we all have a lot of work to do.
Right.
And I applaud you for the work that you're doing, and I applaud you for putting on this session, because these are not easy conversations to have. But as I wouldn't have taken this position if I wasn't prepared to do so.
Right.
Thank you. I think Saba, let's have you continue a little bit. Maybe jump to, I don't know, you got a lot there, so I don't know. Maybe.
Well, all right. I'll just.
Through and then
so
jump
we do need to talk about the wackadoodles at QAnon, because this is because as we could laugh about this is not funny, because we have Senator Marjorie Taylor Greene from Dove's region of Atlanta. We have Congresswoman, sorry, Representative Lauren Boebert, and then we have Michael Flynn, who is a former security advisor. And what do they believe? That Jews, that Hollywood, that African Americans, that the left, that the Rothschilds, George Soros are stealing Christian babies, and that basically the only person who could save these children, again, from this blood libel is President Trump. This is a cult conspiracy theory that appropriates anti-Semitism, racism, also school shootings. They don't believe in that. And these people have found their way. It's not just some random group of white people in the suburbs. They've found their way into our government. And this is really, really scary and something that needs to be addressed. Joe, do you want me to go with anti-Semitism on the left? And we'll do this quickly because I don't want to usurp all the time. But the thing about anti-Semitism on the left is, on the right, it's so obvious. But on the left, it's a lot more insidious, and a lot of times it's often disguised as anti-Zionism. Just quickly, Zionism is a belief in the Jewish state of Israel, that Jews have the belief the desire and are able to have self-determination in their homeland that they lived in 3,000 years. This is important. You could be a Zionist and also believe in Palestinian statehood and for Palestinians to be able to have human rights, et cetera. And that's called a two-state solution, which I am proud to be a part of an organization that believes in that and that fights for both. Anti-Zionism is telling Jews you're white, when actually 53% of Jews who live in Israel are Middle Eastern, you have Black Jews who live in Israel, et cetera, or that you're white colonizers and that you're not indigenous to the land of Israel. So you're denying that self-determination. Anti-Zionism is disguised as anti-Semitism when Israel has become the collective Jew, when we see Jewish power is now Zionist power, Israel power. It's no longer the Jews who control the banks or politicians, but now Israel, the Israel lobby. Jews are no longer the devil, but not Zionism is satanic. Israel is the new Nazis, as we see in this political cartoon over here. Again, leftist anti-Semitism just believes that Jews do not belong in the Middle East. And this is so funny because when Jews were in the diaspora and they were forced to live in Europe in dealing with the pogroms and anti-Semitism, the belief was that Jews don't belong in Europe. And on the right, they believe Jews do not belong in America. And on the left, it's Jews do not belong in Israel. Where do we belong? And who are you to tell us where we belong when for 3,000 years we have had that desire to live in our homeland in the state of Israel? Again, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. Denying Israel's right to exist is anti-Semitic. So did you want to step in?
I was going to ask, Michael, do you, so Saba has spoken about, wait, Saba, go back one slide. Saba has spoken about anti-Semitism from the left and the right, both political camps. And I'm wondering if you feel that racism exists in both political camps as well.
I can't speak for the right. On the right, I believe that that's just plain, ordinary, run-of-the-mill, 1,000-year-old racism. On the left, I think it's misunderstanding. I think the hesitancy you hear in my voice is because I quite frankly don't understand it. What Saba has laid out is a wonderful outline of an analysis of why it's there, and the complications of the various groups that are affected. But ultimately, we go back to what we were talking about earlier. It's easier to put together a slogan and demonize someone than to analyze the actual underpinnings of what the conflict is and what the conflict is focusing on, and what and a path forward for all the parties involved. But we live in this soundbite era where if it's more than 8 syllables, people kind of clam up and don't want to think that hard. We need to have these conversations. We need to have the analysis that Saba just went through in every venue that we can possibly have, because it is not a soundbite situation. When you look at the situation over in Israel, is this what any citizen of Israel wants in terms of the fights that have to go on in order to preserve not just their culture but their life? And I go back to when there is a solution, but it requires all of us to sit down and understand what forces are trying to push us into the violent solutions that so often we devolve into. there is no question that Israel has the right and the obligation to defend itself. There's no question about that. If you do a thought solution, or a thought problem, and put African Americans into that very situation, we would be fighting just as hard. And when I go back to Greenwood, what would have been the outcome if the citizens of Greenwood had the ability to defend themselves?
Mm-hmm.
What would the narrative be? I promise you it would be different. And I applaud Israel for doing what they're doing, because you're doing what we weren't able to do. So no, there is no easy answer to this, but it is, we have to look at the arc of what has happened to our community and overlay that on what Israel is doing. And I mourn the loss of any life, because that occurs because of this conflict. But when I go back to Greenwood, I understand without question what Israel is doing.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Saba, let's, before we throw to audience questions, I know you got a few more slides.
Right, okay, I won't dwell on anti-Zionism anymore, but just again, criticizing Israel, no problem. Demonizing, delegitimizing, double standards, that's anti-Semitic. Progressive movements, we are told as Jews we have to leave our Zionism, our desire for self-determination outside if we want to be a part of the Chicago Dyke March, which allowed any flag from any country except any flag that represents Israel or even a Jewish star. Unfortunately, the Women's March, Bob Bland, Tamika Mallory, and Linda Sarsour were kicked out because of their anti-Semitism. We don't have time to get into intersectionality. We could do a whole section on that another time. And this is, again, when we're talking about not canceling, but counseling. For example, Congressman Ilhan Omar, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken and help them see the evil doings of Israel. It's all about the Benjamin's baby. This is how you can understand how these tropes, after we've just talked about money, about, you know, the satanic, we're saying how these are seen as anti-Semitic. She said she didn't see it in that way, but now that she has learned. And this is when you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And this is why these talks are so important, is to have those introductions. I don't know her. I hope she has been introduced to this. So another thing that I know the Black community deals with all the time too is, you know, the gaslighting, where white people take it upon themselves to tell the African-American community what is and is not racism, and Jews deal with it all the time. BBC literally just last week asked 4 non-Jews to discuss Jews in Britain and their ethnic minority. Not a single Jew they thought would be important to talk about their own community. And then, of course, here you have dismantling anti-Semitism, winning justice by a Jewish organization called If Not Now, which basically had non-Jews who have said very anti-Semitic things. And then 2 Jews on the panel who do not believe that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. No one in this panel who is from the Jewish community that believes Israel has a right to exist talking about what anti-Semitism is. So the gaslighting of Jews, I don't need to just keep bringing up Farrakhan, but the one thing I really need to talk about, because this is so important, and I've heard it applied before, that Jews were responsible for the slave trade. This came from Farrakhan's ahistorical book, which is full of ridiculous information. And what I do want to just walk away from this by saying, Jews accounted for 1.2% of Southern slave owners. 1.2%. That doesn't make that okay, but 1.2% is not controlling and bringing in slaves. And it's really important, because I've heard that so much before, especially with celebrities who have 4 or 5 million people on their social media. And it's important when you hear that you debunk it, you refute it, and understand it's completely ahistorical. I am done.
All right, so Saba, why don't you turn off your screen share? And I'm so glad that you were able to have those slides. One of the things that I think is sort of on that note, and I think in part to what Michael referred to earlier, is it is important to recognize that the Jewish community is not immune to racism. Just as the Black community is not immune to anti-Semitism, and I think it's it's an area of conversation. And as Saba mentioned, many synagogues now are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously, the conversation around Jews of color, particularly Black Jews, and their role in the community. And one of the things I really commend the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance for is for bringing together a very diverse group of people in the entertainment community, Black, Jewish, and those who are Black Jews. So I always feel it's important, and because it's been mentioned, I didn't mention this at the beginning, I live in Atlanta, and what we saw last week was there were also Asian Jews in our community. The Jewish community is very diverse as a global community. So I want to turn to, in the time we have left remaining, turn over to some of the questions in the Q&A. So there was one question actually that I thought was of particular interest, and this one, Michael, I think it's for you. It was when I asked, talking about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and then someone wrote in and said, would the original movie, Birth of a Nation, that President Wilson showed in the White House be perhaps similar to that? Is that somewhat of a comparison, or is there just sort of too many I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Not really. I mean, the Birth of a Nation is it's one of those movies, one of those propaganda machines that was so impactful in terms of giving people what they wanted to see, what they wanted to hear. So much, to a certain extent, it was the precursor to the internet. It's lies that are spread and repeated, and so that people don't understand what the real truth is. I mean, going back just a few minutes ago to the 1.25% of Jews who were slave owners. There were Blacks who were slave owners as well. I keep my family tree, and I was able to go far enough back, and then there are people far back in my family tree who were Black and who owned slaves. One was actually a colonel in the Confederate Army.
Wow.
There is nothing, you can't, we are all different, but we're all the same, but we are all victims of this racism within this country that has been successful at keeping us from joining together and making sure that we truly have liberty and justice for all, as is put into our the Pledge of Allegiance. The fact of the matter is, we are not all monolithic. We are part of these tribes, but we are not all identical, and we have different points of view. We do what we can to correct those points of view when they're wrong, but to put all groups into one bucket is not true. I mean, you mentioned the QAnon person who is Black Cuban. Totally misled and doing his best to mislead others, but he's not the first.
So I want to sort of piggyback on that. There was a question by someone, by Melissa. The first question, by the way, was by Laura Fine Timberlake. The next question is from Melissa Manchester, and Melissa writes, to both guests, how best to disarm the old, quote, bait and switch of both racism and anti-Semitism, which is to frame Blacks, Jews, or minorities as others, which is followed by dehumanizing. Let Saba, Michael, you just answered the first question. So Saba, you get to go first, and then we'll turn it back to Michael.
Yeah, I have to, I don't know if I understand the question there. Were you?
Yeah, I think it's about, how do we really like, how do we combat these issues, right? Like, how do we, I mean, they are big and they are, but really, especially in the far right, Jews and Blacks are considered as the other, right? We're non-Americans. We were brought here, go back, the phrase, go back to where you came from, right? That's something that's sadly a common refrain that both communities have heard. So what are, some of the ways that we are able to combat that?
Well, I think number one is having these conversations so we could even learn about them and acknowledge them and know where they're coming from. If we don't know that, and if we don't educate each other, and then also be self-reflective within our communities, then we're worthless for each other and for our own communities and the people within our own communities that we might be, not inviting to participate when their voice and their narrative is so important. I think, and I'm not sitting here trying to say, support Urban League and AJC, but yeah, if you don't have time to do this work, and I know that people, families making ends meet, there are people like me, Dove, and Michael whose jobs 24/7, because when you're in nonprofit work, it's over at 6 p.m. It's looking at your phone at 2 a.m. to see what just happened, to make sure what community you need to protect. We are doing this job for you, but we can't do it if we don't have your support, whether that means volunteering, whether it means financial support if you can't volunteer. It's also having these open conversations. It's also recognizing if your aunt makes a racist comment, don't just roll your eyes, but say, listen, I know you don't think this is, but I could tell you my students 20 years ago when I taught at LMU, Michael, where I was for a long time, they didn't know that when they're dressed up as Bob Marley and putting blackface on, that is racist. And they're like, but I didn't know that. I love Bob Marley. And I go, I understand that, but you have to learn the history in order to understand that. And it wasn't reprimanding them, it was teaching them. If they did it again, that's when they get a reprimand, So, but that's the whole thing is, I don't go to my friend and say, you're being an anti-Semite or you are an anti-Semite. It's saying, listen, I know you don't realize when you're saying something like Jew down or Jews this or Jews that, it's really, again, like, and I heard BJEA support coming from Nick Cannon when he says, don't cancel people, counsel people. And I think that's so important. It is teaching, it's understanding, but it's also, we have to step up and do the work that the people who are on this panel listening are doing by spending your time listening to us talk about what we in our communities are battling every day.
I couldn't have said it better. The fact is that 80% of the people listen to the other 20%. And it made the percentages maybe even more skewed now. But the fact of the matter is, people need to hear that, no, I don't agree with that. Because if all you hear is this drumbeat of silence, you start believing what you're hearing. I go back to the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too movement, and the entertainment industry has been doing has been what the Me Too, what the entertainment industry was doing to women was going on for decades, from the beginning of the entertainment industry, and everybody saw it and nobody did anything until the Me Too movement started. And what the Me Too movement did was give people license to speak up. And as more people spoke up, more people said, yeah, you're right. We can't just be silent on this. So many people are silent or just repeating what they have heard, in part because they don't hear from the voices that like ours, to be perfectly honest. I cannot tell you how many conversations that I've had on this very topic with respect to different groups, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, and when I start talking about the history of the civil rights movement and the Rainbow Coalition that made it possible, the Jewish support of the NAACP and the Urban League, and the history of us working together and the successes that we have had. And I see the light in the person's eyes when they say, I didn't know. And we just need to be as vocal and as transparent as the echo chambers are when people go online and hear the nonsense that they're hearing. They just need to be told. I'm reminded of I won't mention the person's name, but one person who lost his job because of things that came out because of the Me Too movement. And I remember reading this article, and his executive assistant, who was a woman, said, I should have protected those women. And so it is not that she condoned it. She clearly understood that it was wrong, but she didn't feel empowered to speak up. This session, one of the reasons I was so excited about being a part of this is because this is a venue that will empower, I hope, empower more people to speak up and say, no, we need to go arm in arm with our Jewish brethren, our Hispanic brethren, our Asian brethren, and our Native American brethren, and walk arm in arm and focus on what we need to do to make this country better for everyone. If I didn't believe that we could do it, I wouldn't be in this chair. But with people like yourselves, I know that it's going to take some time, but we're going to get there.
Okay, well, Michael, I think that is I think it's the best way to end. I got to be honest. You couldn't have said it any better, and I think you really, I just can't thank you both enough, Saba and Michael, for joining us today, for being so honest. I want to give a special thank you to the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance for hosting today's conversation. I know that we could continue on. There were significant questions in the chat that sadly we were unable to get to, but we were already running over. So we'll try to get back to you as best we can. But as was put in the chat, if you visit the BlackJewishENTAlliance.com, you'll be able to find a number of their resources. I know that Saba and Michael and myself are always available to answer any questions. I think you could probably find us all on social media in some way, shape, or form. And I just want to really just thank you all for taking the time, and especially the Jewish holiday of Passover begins on Saturday night. It's a story about redemption. It's a story about rebirth, new beginnings, and I really, I hope that our conversation today will help inspire all of you to engage in your own communities with your friends in other communities, ways to help to combat anti-Semitism and racism in our society today. So thank you all so much, and wishing you all a wonderful day.
Thank you for having us.